$400,000 per month. And here's the kicker. His podcast is The Culture War. The real war to be had is the culture war. Bring it to them and that divide will blur, I guarantee it. So check this out from the DOJ press release. Many of the videos posted by U.S. company One, Tenant Media, contain commentary on events and issues in the U.S. such as immigration, inflation, and other topics related to domestic and foreign policy. While the views expressed in the video are not uniform, most are directed to the publicly stated goals of the government of Russia and RT to amplify domestic divisions in the United States. And there it is, all in black and white. These are the actual documents from the DOJ indictment. Over at least the past year, RT and its employees, including, Kasia and Lena, the defendants, have deployed nearly $10 million laundered through a network of foreign shell entities to covertly fund and direct U.S. Company One. U.S. Company One publishes English language videos on multiple social media channels, including TikTok, Instagram, X, and YouTube. Makes you wonder about the purpose of what you're watching online, right? Or at least the intentions and motivations of others. These are allegations and they haven't been prosecuted, as they are claiming to be victims of this scheme. But motivations are a very important thing, and it's something to consider. So Tim Poole's financial arrangement with Tenant Media, it involved substantial payments for his content. According to reports, he received approximately $400,000 per month from Tenant Media by producing weekly episodes, equating to about $100,000 per episode, making money. It's important to consider that there is like a notable shift here from his previous earnings, an extreme shift, and it highlights that substantial financial impact of his partnership. Pre-Tenet earnings, right? Poole earned between $1,400 and $21,900 through YouTube ad revenue and sponsorships, but you compare that to the Tenet-backed windfall, it's nothing in comparison. I mean, $400,000 monthly. That is insane. So now let's take a look at the monetization of his culture war. There's a business model here, right? Step one, you create the content that taps into that fear and anger, because as we all know, outrage equals clicks, a lot of it. Step two, you package it as a fight for cultural survival for the betterment of you. And three, you monetize. He's built an entire brand, fueling division. And here's the kicker, his podcast is The Culture War. An example that I have here are headlines. For instance, they are crafted and framed to produce a strong emotional reaction among people, often distilling like deterministic and compelling sound bites. And this tactic, it's not about understanding or bringing a blend of other sides to it. It's about driving engagement. And I'd like to take a closer look at one of his broadcasts that I think demonstrates this quite well.
We have an example here from the Daily Mail. This is from February. New York teacher manipulated.
So keep in mind right here that the headline is teacher manipulated 5th grade student into transitioning, which resulted in tragedy. So we're going to talk about this, or at least that is how it's framed, right? Let's see what it's really about and what they're going to discuss. Think about how long they actually talk about that topic.
Grade student into changing gender without parents' consent, which drove her to consider suicide, lawsuit claims. The response you typically get from people on the left is, it's an anecdote, it's one story. To which my response is, then why not just when Ben Shapiro comes out and says this is bad, you go, you are so right, Ben Shapiro, I'm so sorry this happened. Instead, the response you get is dismissal, saying, no, you're wrong, no, this doesn't matter, which then you basically have overt support from the political left in this country of things like this when they dismiss or defend it.
Okay. It's 2 questions, and I'm not even
So that's the hook.
that I'm right on this. I want to know if the teacher was gay.
No.
They weren't. The New York teacher that supported wasn't gay, right?
The teacher was, according to the lawsuit and photographs,
they're not gay, I bet.
Reading LGBT books to children and encouraging them to try being gay even if they were not.
Okay, is the teacher gay?
I don't believe the teacher is gay.
I don't think so either, because no one actually gay would ever say that.
The blur and the blend, where we actually had a debate between 2 drags and one of the drag queens says that they are trans.
Which is so interesting to me.
There's no
But, like,
rules.
there's no rules, right? Right. There's some logic that we could stick to, logic that I've been canceled for before, and I will be canceled again, right? I will call you whatever the hell you want. I don't care, right? Pronouns.
Making a little bit of effort to show mutual respect to an individual really makes a difference when you are going to try and have a meaningful conversation.
Pronouns
What
replace.
if a white kid says they want to be called black?
Okay, great question. Fantastic question. I will address the first point and then I will get to that point. And I love that question. Pronouns are he, him, they, them, it, it's, like all of that stuff, right? And those should be valued, but I don't think we should also be like, well, I'm not going to call you cat.
Race.
What? Race, right? Such a good question. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, right? Now, here is where I differentiate the two. Where is the line between a biological difference and a social difference between men and women on a biological level? There are biological differences between men and women. But like someone could ask me, like, what is a woman? It depends on the context you're asking me. Are you asking me in a scientific context?
So social structures, what we actually consider as a male archetype and female archetype. And Des is bringing in a new perspective. And mind you, we're about not even a third into this. So is the topic still teachers manipulated fifth grade student into transitioning, which resulted in tragedy? Why not frame this as Desmond brings new perspectives to the table for us to consider? Now, would that get as many clicks? Probably not. But is that what this is actually about?
Are you asking me in a social context? Here's where it gets tricky. We know that there are biological differences between men and women. For example, women, oxytocin, better at communicating. Now, if you say, well, a white kid wants to be called black, what exactly are you identifying with that is black? Because by definition, if you think that black people act a certain way or do things in a certain way, that's racism. There's nothing different between white and black other than skin tone.
It's such a good point. The point being that the words that we use, these labels, are social structures.
Biological differences between men and women. There are not biological differences between white and black other than melanin, right? That's why if a white kid said, I want to be black, I'd be like, what's your black experience that you're experiencing? Yes, tell.
Well, I'll push back a little bit.
Okay, I want to hear this.
There are obvious biological differences between white and black beyond just melanin.
Okay, we got some muscle differences, height differences. I got you. That's fair.
Well, yeah, and I don't think the color of the skin or the race, it matters that much. But obviously, sickle cell affects the black population.
It doesn't matter, but I'm going to bring it up.
Or so.
Absolutely.
But then the issue, we've talked about this quite a bit.
Notice how Desmond validates what he's saying. That's important in communication and also shows that they want to have an open dialogue, whereas his statements are primarily bald and direct and black and white.
One of the arguments being made by gender ideologues is that we used to have racial segregation in this country. And what was the argument for having black bathrooms and white bathrooms? There was a bit of a just moralistic, a non-scientific view of what was supposed to be.
Right.
But then there were also arguments presented by people who were trying to justify why we had racial segregation, saying things like the danger, black people are different in this way and then there's risks. But the reality is you get a black man from Somalia and a black man from Haiti and they're very, very, very different. And then the only
And that validates Des's point in the fact that it is cultural, right? That these are social constructs based on our society.
Characteristic is the color of their skin, which doesn't seem to actually help identify anything.
Thank you. We have a biological category, not utter chaos, that we can kind of make a distinction from. Oh, you are biologically this, but tend to have these characteristics, therefore trans, therefore non-binary. We don't have that with the black population.
But when it comes to gender stuff, why then surgery? If gender is social, why do you need to medically or surgically affirm it?
Do you want to take that one? Because that is such a good question.
If there's this known biological difference, which there is, having sports competitions be changed or, the prison system and all of these different things.
Right. And it's very interesting to kind of look at the different kind of LGBTQIA perspectives. That idea of to be trans, you don't need affirming surgery, but that I say it should be accessible, and it should be. But what are the processes that we need to go through to make sure gender affirming care is beneficial? What guardrails do we need to put in play? I don't think banning it outright is a good situation. That idea of wait for them to go through puberty entirely, that could be really, really kind of mentally draining for somebody who's trans, right? That needs to go through a puberty. Yeah,
there's no argument against. I do not believe that there is any logical argument against what I said. If this is,
and there it is. There's no logical argument against X. It is black and white. It shuts down the conversation. It shows that you're not open, no matter where you lie on this. Communication is important.
Rates are studied found to be between 60 and 95%, then all you are doing by transitioning a minor is risking their suicide.
Okay, so hear me out. Desistance rates. First of all, those studies are. Have you seen those? Have you seen those studies? They're a mess. Like
that was no.
Those are like the smallest sample sizes, ridiculously biased. Not saying you're wrong, because I can't prove otherwise.
And that sample size, the things this individual's mentioning, it's very important. Like the population, the geographical location, it can result in getting a result that you want. And this is a tricky topic, right? There seems to be some politicizing of it. I think we can all agree on that. But it's such a small population at the same time that in order to grab good points of data, in order to make a conclusion, it's difficult. I would assume that many of these would be or should be small case studies. What they could try to do is gather multiple studies and do what's called a meta-analysis, which is a collection of studies and their information, conglomerating it together and doing an overarching analysis of it, therefore getting more points of data to come to a conclusion.
My only response is the left and the right both point to each other's studies and say they're wrong.
Absolutely. And
if the only data we have shows desistance rates to be this high, there is no medical or scientific argument for transitioning minors.
Okay, hear me out. I did not start dance until the 4th grade because I thought dancing was for girls.
Notice how Des uses personal experience in order to explain their point. It's effective, very effective. When you can relate to that personal experience rather than the topic, specifically the topic, it makes a difference.
I didn't want to do something that was for girls. I did every single sport. I tried to be a boy so hard. I did start growing facial hair when I was like 12, right? And that did not work for me. It did not work. I don't identify as trans. I identify as non-binary. Facial hair, you look great, by the way. Facial hair did not work for me. It did not work to the point where I could not shave. Like, and I know that sounds weird, but that idea of not only was facial hair wrong, but needing to deal with facial hair was inherently problematic. My mom had to shave for me. Yes, I just said that on a live podcast.
You said you had 2 moms?
Now, what was the purpose of making that statement? Obviously, this individual, Mr. Poole, is making a point, right? He wants to highlight that.
So they were separated, right? And that's actually, really good question that we can go into there, because then a lot of people are like, well, they indoctrinated you. No, they didn't.
And that's why he brought it up. That is why he brought it up.
But like, here's the deal. That idea of hear me out. One actually had to shave for me because I was so against shaving. And did I get laser hair removal on my face at the age of like 15, 16? 1,000%. And did that make high school and college a lot easier for me? 1,000%. And that's a medical intervention that I did at a very young age. And I actually, and in a way, it supports both of our arguments.
Well,
right?
I don't think removing hair is comparable to sterilization.
Well, absolutely, right? But in a way, it's part of it is that I was indoctrinated by, my mom's, I was indoctrinated by the Bay Area. It's not the case.
I do think there's a variety of conflicting worldviews. People were saying that people shouldn't have the right to have their male child circumcised. And that was because, again, it was a medical intervention. And
right. But on that note, and that's the end of that video, I remember when a news article came out regarding in Africa, they were cutting the labia off of women. Now, of course, there are very bad side effects of this, other than the fact that, as we deemed it in our culture, quote unquote, genital mutilation. But doesn't circumcision have a similar effect? Aren't we mutilating what it should, originally be, like what we are born with? And aren't there also physical effects as well? It's actually pretty sexist, and it says a lot to our culture here because it is common in our culture, but not in others. Anyway, moving forward from that point, kind of conclude all of that, in that conversation, the way that Poole was communicating, it lacked nuance. It reduced these complex topics to declarative statements. And there's such a contrast, right, between Desmond and Poole and the other individual, not only with how they physically communicate, but how they articulate their point. For example, with personal experience, the validation of the other person's perspective, and bringing and influencing the other to have a sort of empathy with the individual. And also with that validation and other means of how Des communicated, it brought a mutual respect to the table. And that invites dialogue by emphasizing that mutual respect and the validation. It really is a prerequisite to any meaningful conversation, which has really been lost due to this cultural war, in my opinion. So, moving forward with Russian motivations and intentions, Russian disinformation often fuels us versus them narratives, which I think we just demonstrated an example of that. And it pits Americans against each other based on race, religion, gender, political ideology, and socioeconomic status. All of this promotes isolationism as well. In other words, we stay out of foreign affairs, right? We don't get into Ukraine. And Tim Poole really changed his tone with the Ukrainian war. Really did. The amount of videos that were taken down, I think were around 400. And many of them were framing Ukraine as the problem. Now, taking a look at Tim Poole's motivations, he thrives on gaining revenue by engagement. And Tim Poole's content, it thrives on this high engagement, which is maximized through these outrage-driven topics. Now, of course, we have to be able to have conversation about these topics, and it's important, but look at how Desmond communicated and compare that to how Tim communicated his points. I would say that Dez's method was much more effective. It's calm, it's understanding, it doesn't promote that conflict, it attempts to bridge a gap of difference. And I think that is so important, especially now, right? Rather than focusing on those tribal instincts that we all naturally have, rather bringing a feeling of togetherness rather than exclusion and this polar way of thinking. So he drives on these emotional reactions, and he's branded as a cultural commentator, I would say, in my opinion, as that is primarily what he does, and that's primarily where he gets his engagement. He positions himself as this voice in the cultural war, and he has built a brand that relies on the persistence of these divisions. I mean, he is invested in this, and his success is dependent on keeping audiences invested in the conflict. Why would he want to resolve this when his gain is on continuing it? I mean, if that is his niche of sowing division, why would he change it up? Why would he bring people together when his paycheck is dependent on it? There is this ideological appeal to what he does as he frames his content as being about exposing truths or defending freedoms, you know, things where it requires a conflict, and it resonates with audiences who feel alienated or antagonized by these mainstream narratives. But couldn't we change that up a bit? Couldn't we bring things together? I think there is a misunderstanding or this perception that we want conflict, but societies thrive on unity. And I think with what is going on now and in the past, as this has been going on for at least a decade, I mean, it has been going on a long time, but our unity is what gives us a future. So kind of bringing this all together into a conclusion, looking at these motivations, what people have invested in this, I think it's safe to say that, you know, Tim Poole was a tool in this. He was aligned with Russia's motivations, maybe before, but definitely when he was accepting a paycheck. As the rhetoric increased, right? The implications of this, where he may not intentionally align with the Russian objectives, but his approach to the content creation inadvertently contributes to the same outcomes Russia seeks, which is division, distrust, and the perpetuation of these cultural conflicts. And this alignment raises a lot of ethical questions and conversations to be had about the role of media and influences in either mitigating or exasperating social divides. Furthermore, I'd like you to consider that if an enemy's motivations align with another entity, so if X aligns with Y, does that not mean that it is inherently bad? I mean, I can enjoy a good time, but too many good times make a bad time. And right now, the amount of this cultural war consumption has reached that point of an ism, something unhealthy and harmful for us. The real war to be had is the culture war. Bring it to them, and that divide will blur. I guarantee it.